So I want to go back to IRS definition, then we're going to come back to after you depreciate it. So IRS definition, you mentioned that with the real estate professional status. What about when we're looking at the numbers that we're going to put on our, let me say, my handwritten Excel, sheet on my notepad when I'm walking through the house? When really what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire you to come through and put it all together for me, right? But when people are looking at the actual numbers, I mean, I've got curtains behind me here. How do we know what everything is actually worth that's in a reasonable amount of the IRS? Are we talking about predefined definitions for every single thing, or is it based on experience and your expertise?
There are some predefined definitions. So we use several different softwares that are kind of standardized by the industry, and the IRS recognizes that will kind of construction data software that will identify all these different components and say, curtains are, I'm just throwing a number out there. I don't know the actual numbers. I'm not the engineer doing the job, but let's say it's, $1 per square foot or something like that, right? And so if you have, 300 square feet of curtains across your, your multifamily property, so now you're going to have whatever that is, $300 worth of depreciable value of that. Obviously it's much more than that, but just to give an example. So yeah, we're going to use those numbers. We're going to come up with the values through that. So it's not something that you as the owner need to take note of unless you are either doing a renovation and you're actually adding those values, or you're doing a new construction, in which case, in both of those instances, our engineers are going to take the actual costs being spent and allocate those costs appropriately to the different categories. But what we're doing generally with the concentration is on acquisition. So if you build a property ground up, you know exactly every line item how much something costs. But when you're buying an existing property, this is really the novelty of cost segregation, is saying, well, now I can reverse engineer the property and figure out, based on the purchase price, how much all of the components can now add back up to that purchase price.
So I guess, and I don't know if it's possible. Maybe there's the IRS thinks of ways to not let people circumvent the rules, or if there's stopgap measures. But from a market statistical component, I'd be curious. Do you ever see someone get a cost segregation analysis to where the amount found in the cost segregation is more than they paid for the property?
No. So unfortunately, that's the point. We are only, to answer your question, we're always going to have to add up to that purchase price, because you're only able to depreciate what it is that you paid for it. However, it raises a very interesting point. What if you bought something, that is very undervalued, or you bought something that's very overvalued? In both of those cases, in our calculations, there's always going to be either a premium or a discount value applied to the entire property and all the components, which means, and this is part of the complications of doing the cost segregation, is that you need experts doing this to come up with those values. Because you may say, well, I've added up every component and it equals, $1 million, but I paid, only $300,000 for the property. Well, sorry, you can only depreciate $300,000. So now how do we apply a discount rate to all of those individual components to make sure that everything is being depreciated properly according to its proportion and its percentage, and also coming and adding up to that value?